Mary LaHammer here from Twin Cities PBS with Almanac, giving you some context and story behind the story. And this story is the Republican gubernatorial candidate debate. It was in rural Minnesota in a very red county. Lyon County in Marshall, Minnesota, Southwest State was the location down there at the college. And we were the only TV crew to actually make the trek. There was limited media there. This is about a, 6 hour round trip from the metro. So interesting to see who showed up and who didn't. And also interesting to see how appreciative local folks were. I think it's easy to simplify that Republicans are in a war with and hate the media right now. I got to say, the organizers for the weeks leading up to it were excited we were coming, answered all of our questions. Former state lawmaker and legislative leader Marty Seifert's from the area, and Marty had told us about this for some time. We're in contact with him. He still appears regularly on our shows. But also all the local lawmakers, the local state representative, the local senator walked up and said, "Thank you for coming." They were excited. I think the quote was, "Thanks for coming to God's country." So I think appreciation for the media making the drive. Star Tribune was there, WCCO Radio was there, to really see what I think is an early test of a very interesting race. We are a little less than a year away from the candidates for governor squaring off and Republicans and Democrats deciding who their final candidates are going to be. Republicans, there are about a dozen Republicans in the race for governor at this point. In this debate, the official candidates invited, there were 9. That's still a very large group, and it was interesting to see them in an audience. It was a cold, snowy night. We had whiteout conditions part of the drive down. So we weren't sure how many people were going to show up. I would say it was a nearly full packed house full of energy. You'll see in the story in just a moment of, there were auctions and there were hoops and hollers and motivated group because they really think they have a chance. Republicans think they can end the 20-year drought of losing statewide, and particularly losing what is the most important office in Minnesota politics, and that is governor. So they see an opportunity with Walz and fraud, that there is vulnerability there. Also the fact that no one has won a third 4-year term for governor, and Walz is attempting something that's never been done before in Minnesota history. So Republicans, very motivated, showed up for this debate. What I think a little, insider backstory on it, kind of the vibe was insider versus outsider in this large group. The outsiders really liked Trump and talked a lot about Trump and said, that's why they should be elected, because Trump was elected as an outsider and definitely were close to him in their arguments. But they all spoke about unity and how they shouldn't disparage each other too much because they want a Republican to finally win. So I would say the tone was fairly collegial. I'll get into the ways they disagreed. Most do want Trump's endorsement. They pretty much all said that. They all pretty much wanted term limits, aside from one elected official who said, term limits don't serve the legislature well in particular, because then you don't have that institutional knowledge of some veteran lawmakers. Staff lobbyists tend to take over and know more than elected officials if you term limit state lawmakers. Now, the insider perspective, because there are several elected officials there, insider perspective definitely was a quote from one was, "The state is desperate for proven leadership." And that came from current Speaker of the House, Republican Lisa Dameth. And she said, "I beat Tim Walz at the organizing and negotiating table." She said, I sat toe to toe with him and beat him this last session on several matters. She also said that she took responsibility for breaking the trifecta when Democrats controlled the governor's office, House, and Senate, kind of ran the table and did whatever they wanted and got a lot done for Democrats. And she took responsibility as the leader of the caucus. She recruited and ran that campaign and said, "I broke up the trifecta." I'd never heard her use that strong of words about her leadership. And so she said, "I beat Tim Walz in the last election cycle with the House now in a tie." She said, "I beat Tim Walz at the negotiating table." And she said, "I intend to beat Tim Walz again." So I think she probably still is the candidate to beat, came out very strong in this. But there are other candidates, some who have run before, and some are kind of seen as a wild card as well. I think we'll take a look at the debate and then I'll talk some more afterwards.
This is a very, very, very exciting year. We need to turn this state red. And this is This is the beginning.
Republicans in rural Red Marshall, Minnesota were raring to go.
We have all the money to beat Tim Walz in November. The bad news is it's still in your pockets.
Beating Governor Walz was the target in an auction that animated the crowd.
35, let's get it to 35.
The main event was the 9 candidates for governor squaring off.
I have beat Tim Walz at the negotiating table as I've sat face to face with him.
I am running for governor because we can do better. We can get Minnesota back on the right track, and Minnesota can prosper for everyone. So I will stop the fraud.
Current state lawmakers are well known, but there are fresh faces in the race.
I'm a counterterrorism and foreign policy specialist.
Recently, I've represented Trooper Ryan Londrigan.
The best job I had in the Marine Corps was as an infantry company commander.
Like the rest of them, I was a UFC fighter.
City council member in St. Cloud. I was the guy that brought forward the refugee resettlement moratorium in 2017.
This crowded contest for the Republican nomination for governor is an interesting mix of many newcomers and a couple of candidates who have run before, including Kendall Qualls and Scott Jensen.
Tim Walz at one level is an imposter. He lies readily.
Raise your hand if you're a Republican and you're tired of losing every one of these statewide elections.
Cost of living was the first question. No surprise, Republicans want taxes cut.
I found out in college that the easiest way for me not to spend money was not to have any money.
If you want to build Minnesota, we got to do it with plumbers and electricians and carpenters.
What we need to do is make sure that we can help this next generation get started in life and ease the burden of those retired.
We need to reduce the waste within state government. We need to reduce fraud, and those that are causing fraud against the taxpayers need to be held accountable.
Government spending is out of control. We went from a $52 billion budget in 2023 to a $72 billion budget 2 years later. 40% increase. Minnesotans did it get a 40% increase in their paychecks.
It's going to be very hard to get people to move to Minnesota when we've got one of the highest tax rates in the country. Property tax rates are going up.
We need to open the mines up north. There's almost $4 trillion of our money sitting in the ground. We also need to start not just mining, but oil drilling here.
If we cut DEI employees in state agencies, we'd save $31 million right there.
We can end the fraud. We can end Social Security tax. We can reduce, if not eliminate, many taxes.
Candidates were asked for a policy of President Trump's they disagree with.
The way that the tariffs were unrolled was problematic for me.
Our biggest problem as Republicans, we have to get a candidate elected.
I understand the challenge that tariffs have made, specifically when it comes to agriculture.
I sent the president a letter back in July asking for help from federal DHS to do a full audit of Minnesota DHS, and it took a long time to get a response, but they are fully engaged in the federal government in helping us stop the fraud, and I'm delighted to see it. So maybe the timing was a little off, but we're very happy to have our federal partners helping us with stopping the fraud in Minnesota.
I'm not a fan of the national debt or the annual deficit.
It's shocking in all effect. Really kind of hurts us all when it comes down to the minorities.
When the president did call a group of people garbage, I had a hard time with that.
He's too slow to endorse candidates. He waits too long. It's too safe.
I have the U.S. debt clock on my phone. Our debt per citizen right now is $111,783. We need to do something about this.
Next question is if they'd abide by the endorsement.
At this time, no.
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 Yes, and hell yes.
I will abide by the endorsement.
I'm going to stay in the race as long as I think I'm the best person to beat Tim Walz.
I'll abide by it if we endorse somebody who can realistically win the general election.
No.
100% yes.
The contenders were asked to prove how they'd attract non-Republicans to win statewide, which gave elected officials an advantage.
I am the only candidate, including Governor Walz, that is named my lieutenant governor. Ryan Wilson, he is in the room with us tonight, and he came the closest to a statewide race in 2022. We are a proven ticket that can cross over, get the votes needed in greater Minnesota to get turnout, in the suburbs to move those numbers up, and to make inroads in our metro areas.
I have a track record. When you compare my stats to anyone on this dais, I outperform all of them. And I have a track record of getting crossover voters in suburban districts, and we need to bring suburban voters back.
As you could see, fairly congenial debate. The candidates didn't fight with each other much. The one who did try and differentiate himself is former state senator and former candidate for governor, endorsed candidate Scott Jensen. Jensen was the candidate last time. We do know Republicans have endorsed the same candidate twice in a row before. Jeff Johnson got the Republican nod for governor not once, but twice, and he lost not once, but twice. I don't know that Republicans want to repeat that again because there is really new energy and new hope for Republicans to break the long drought in the governor's office. And there was definitely an attempt and conversation about not degrading each other, because reminding folks that their ultimate goal, these Republicans down in Lyon County in Marshall, Minnesota, definitely saying they see Walz as vulnerable. They see the governor's race as winnable. And ultimately kept reminding each other that that was the goal. But Jensen did kind of go after the other candidates, and he went after the two other electeds in a subtle way. He kind of took on Speaker Demuth, who was one of the leaders in the legislative session, and his quote was, in 2025, the legislature didn't do well, didn't have a good outcome. And I could see, Speaker Demuth definitely heard that and knew he was talking about her. And then he also said the fraud committee didn't, quote, do anything, and that is chaired by Representative Kristen Robbins, another candidate sharing the podium there. Jensen said the feds did all the work and referenced U.S. attorney going after fraud. Fraud was one of the top issue in this debate and generally one of the top issues for Republicans, where again, they see Governor Walz as vulnerable overseeing fraud that is now making national news and becoming front page news practically every day. So very interesting to see kind of one candidate trying to differentiate himself, but as a candidate who's gotten the nomination and lost before. We did see folks also saying, quote, don't be mean, don't be nasty, don't scare voters. I think that was from perhaps the newest candidate in the race, Maddle, rhymes with paddle. And he is seen as kind of a wild card and said he's definitely appealing to moderates. The question is, does he appeal to voters in rural Minnesota? At one point, there was a question about should the Appleton prison be reopened? That was a private prison that's been closed for some time. And he said, are we talking about the Stillwater prison? And I kind of heard some people around me in the audience, these rural voters, kind of make a little noise like he didn't maybe know about the Appleton prison, and that's a big issue in the region. And he eventually pivoted on that one, but I don't know that he connected with the rural voters as much as he maybe would have hoped based on the reaction I heard in that audience, especially on that question about the Appleton prison. Now, the Star Tribune headline, interesting on this one, it says Trump looms large over the Minnesota Republican race. I think that's definitely true. That story, though, is behind a paywall. This is not. I want to remind you, I do bring you this information and this context and depth and story behind the story for free. You can upgrade. We definitely want you to subscribe. You can upgrade that subscription, and then you can comment and also give feedback. It is absolutely true that the feedback I have received, I have incorporated, and I will listen to that. I'm here broadcasting for you and trying to give you more context and depth in this era of kind of misinformation, misunderstanding, distrust of the press. I want to tell you how and why we do the stories that we do. And we went down to southwestern Minnesota, the only TV station to do so and be there, because this is the premier statewide race, the race for governor. Hope you can continue to enjoy our coverage. Thank you.